Welcome to the September 21st, 2020 pandemic check-in. And the way that these meetings usually start is that I do 5 or 10 minutes of news that's occurred over the last month or so that has to do with the pandemic and how it relates to our practices. And then we turn off the recording and go into a group sharing mode so that people can talk freely without worrying about having their words recorded. And just so that you know, the recording didn't happen when we had the meeting last night, so I'm redoing it this morning and I'll post it. So this is what we talked about last night in the news brief. A lot's happened in the last month. And that can impact massage therapists. I have 8 items to report. The links will be in a file that I will post with the video. The first thing I'd like to do is to acknowledge and thank the Facebook group Massage Health Practitioners and COVID-19. They call these stories to my attention. If you don't know about them or haven't joined them, I highly recommend joining them because they are a science-based Facebook group. They vet the posts very carefully to make sure that they are science-based and accurate, and they do a great job. So I thank them for calling my attention to some of these items, and then what I do is take that information and run with it. Last month, someone asked me about decontaminating N95s and reusing N95s, masks or respirators. And I did some research on that and posted that info in a PDF online. So you can find that at this link. The second item is that last month I reported that the CDC said that people who were exposed but not showing symptoms shouldn't get tested. And then they partially walked that back. Well, there's even more news on this because just this past Friday, September 18th, the CDC walked those statements all the way back and went back to the original recommendation that if you've been exposed, you should get tested. The takeaway is if you or a client have been exposed, even if you're not showing symptoms, go get tested. Because that's the only way you're going to know whether or not you may have the disease if you are asymptomatic, and whether or not you're contagious. So it's very important to get tested if you've been exposed. And the CDC made other news this weekend. Last month, I reported that scientists were putting pressure on the World Health Organization and the CDC about the aerosolized spread of COVID-19. We hadn't had a meeting for quite some time, so this had happened over some months. And the WHO actually did accept this more recently. But over the weekend, the CDC quietly updated its site to acknowledge that, yes, the virus spreads through aerosols. And it added language that COVID-19 spreads through, quote, small particles such as those in aerosols, unquote. And it also added that it spreads when you breathe and goes on to say, quote, there is growing evidence that droplets and airborne particles can remain suspended in the air and be breathed in by others and travel distances beyond 6 feet. For example, during choir practice, in restaurants, or in fitness classes. In general, indoor environments without good ventilation increase this risk, unquote. So the takeaway here is what we've been saying all along, that this virus is more spreadable than thought by the CDC or WHO, that masks combined with physical distancing is best. And since those of us in the massage therapy field, we can't do that. We can't physically distance. So it means that we wear N95s or equivalent respirators to protect yourself and your client. Your clients should wear a mask to help stop the spread, as they could also be asymptomatic. And you need good ventilation in your space. That means HEPA air purifiers or open windows. And you need to check the filtration in your building or office. And we'll talk more about that in a minute because some other things came up around that this month. So then after I put all this together about the aerosols, including the slides, I got a heads up that these changes were taken down. So I added this slide. And in all good conscience, I can't not talk about what's happening here. I'm really trying to thread the needle here because I don't want to get too political. I want to keep this information and this forum as a politics-free zone so that everybody feels free to share. But we're talking about science and public health and the need to have accurate information. So what happened is last Thursday, reporting uncovered in the New York Times, reporting by the New York Times, uncovered that the scientists of the CDC, a well-respected science-based organization, those scientists were overruled by the administration, the current administration, on the testing issue. And that happened last month. And when this story broke, the actual science that everyone should get tested was restored the next day on Friday to the site. So, but this last action about taking down scientifically validated information about aerosolization appears to be the same. I'm hoping that the recognition of the role of aerosols is not being covered up for political reasons, because the science points to the fact that the virus is aerosolized, and people need to understand this information as it's critical to staying safe. And so I'm going to leave it at that. That's as political as we're going to get, but I want to continue on to the next item, which is about aerosolization and ventilation systems in buildings. So there was a recent Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy articles, a CIDRAP article that cited two studies. Okay, the study of interest to us comes from the Netherlands and concerns a nursing home. The staff of the entire facility followed the same precautions. So all the staff, all the people, the patients in the support staff, they followed all the same protocols throughout the entire facility. The only difference was in the ventilation system. In the ward where all the infections occurred, the COVID-19 infections, unfiltered indoor air was recirculated. Okay, so that's where the infections occurred, where unfiltered indoor air was recirculated. Whereas where the infections did not occur, those ventilation systems brought in outside air into the system. And so a couple of things. One is that this showed that indeed the virus does spread through aerosol transmissions. And secondly, it's all about recirculated air and air purification and ventilation systems. And so our takeaway from that, or the lesson that we get from this, is that is to ask your building supervisors what kind of air system and air filters that they have. According to the folks at the Facebook group, Massage Health Practitioners and COVID-19, the system has to be at least a MERV 15. The filters have to be MERV 13 or higher, and like a MERV 14 or a MERV 15, or they also call them M13s. But ideally, you want them to be a MERV 13 or higher. And if you're working from home, you can get those filters for your house too. You can buy air filters that are MERV 13 or higher for your house, and you can buy them anywhere furnace filters are sold. But if your building supervisors don't know what the system is, or they're not using M13 or higher, the Facebook group folks recommend that you block the vents, okay? Because you don't want recirculated air in your space, because that's how the virus spreads. It's got to be fresh air. Now, related to this, just to let you know about this again, or reiterate this again, is that if you run a fan and keep the air moving in your space, that's not okay, because what it'll do is it'll keep the virus up in the air or move it up into the air off the surfaces. But however, you can use a fan to push air out the window, and also get a HEPA air purification system. Again, the Facebook group has a whole post on air filtration and systems and what not to use in terms of the kinds of air filtration systems. So that's about ventilation systems. So make sure that you're checking your building's ventilation systems. So the next item on our agenda is about symptoms. So let's talk about the latest on symptoms and know what to look for. We already know about the loss of taste and smell, but a systematic review and meta-analysis research study showed that the loss of taste and smell is more major than we thought, about 43%. And those with just some dysfunction is around 47.5%. And what's to be of note here is that those symptoms tend to decrease with age, being male, and with disease severity. But one of the other things that I also thought interesting about that meta-study was that it is also ethnic based as well, because it's having the loss of taste and smell is much more likely in Caucasians than in Asians. So just be aware of that when you're screening people for symptoms. There's also a worldwide study that anyone diagnosed with COVID can participate in. Okay, and how you participate is you go to this website and download an app. And about 4 million people or so are participating in it. What's of interest for us is a couple of things, is that based on the symptoms, they group them in clusters, is that there are 6 distinct types of COVID-19. And every single one of those symptom clusters has headaches and loss of smell as the first 2 symptoms. That's significant. So we really want to be sure that we're looking for headaches and loss of smell as part of the symptomology in our screening process. So if someone does present with these, we want to refer them out. But also what they found, the researchers found within these clusters, is that based on the type that a person fits into, or the cluster a person fits into, they were able to determine just how likely a person needs to be hospitalized or needs breathing support. And they're able to do it much earlier than if the person just self-reports to a doctor's office or the hospital. Because usually it was like a little more than 2 weeks for someone to, for the doctors and the hospitals to find out, hey, this person needs this support, versus it was like, I can't remember if it was 5 or 8 days. It's been a while since I've read this study, but it was like 5 or 8 days earlier. So then that means that the person can get help earlier in the process based on their symptom cluster, which is really important in survival rates. So I just really recommend that for us, while we may not necessarily see an active case in our practice, familiarize yourself with these types, because if a person has several symptoms plus shortness of breath, diarrhea, or abdominal pain, they're in that cluster 6 or type 6, and they really need to get checked out as soon as possible, because they are nearly half of this group ended up in the hospital. Okay, so that's really important in terms of how we can help screen people and help make sure that people get the help that they need. Now, if you're interested in joining the study, or having any of your clients join the studies who have been diagnosed with COVID-19, the link is on the page too. Just go to that Join Zoe link that's there, and you can read all about the different types of COVID-19 as well as join the study. The next item on our agenda is long haulers and the longer term effects of the disease. The first article that I want to talk about is one that came out of Scientific American, and what they're saying is that you can tell by the link URL, is that we're seeing more heart damage even among those who are asymptomatic. They're reporting that younger adults are developing myocarditis, and that this is popping up in athletes, which is key and critical for all these football seasons, or football players that are having difficulty when they come down with the symptoms. The article also notes that the heart damage can linger months after being infected. For example, one study that the article cited said that 10 weeks After initial symptoms, over a third of the 139 health workers had developed myocarditis. And in a German study, 78% of recovered patients had cardiac issues 2 months after diagnosis. Well, how does this pertain to us? The upshot is that we may see some asymptomatic people in our practices, and if someone is experiencing heart racing or arrhythmias, or their heart is doing weird things to them, then that's a sign that they need to go checked out by a physician, because that could be just the sort of warning signs about having the heart damage that might be there. And or also, if we know people who are symptomatic, just making sure that they're staying on top of this, because this is a major issue. I wanted to find out just how many people were actually long haulers. And there's not really a lot of stats on that I could find, but I did find a July 31st report that 35%, that's over a third of patients not sick enough to be hospitalized. That's, again, not sick enough to be hospitalized, are not back to their usual health 3 weeks after diagnosis. Now, as compared to the flu, it usually takes about 2 weeks. But here's is saying something that at least 3 weeks they're not feeling better. And then about long haulers themselves, they're back in the news and getting more attention. There was an article that came out on September 10th, which had the headline, "They're not actually getting better," says founder of COVID-19 Long Hauler Support Group. And well, that title seems to say it all. They take a long time to get better, and still, even months later, some still aren't better. But there are a couple of things that interest us about this article. One is the Survivorcorps.com website. As practitioners, I'd point any long haulers to this group, people who are not getting better, because the Survivorcorps website has all kinds of resources and articles and really good stuff. They also point people toward what are called post-COVID care centers. They've got a listing there, and they're asking their members to actually look for that as well. But what post-COVID care centers is, these are where medical professionals specialize in caring for long haulers. They're starting to pop up all over, and which indicates just how serious the problem of long haulers or long haul effects of the disease is. And so the website points you to these facilities. And so again, I just recommend telling your clients or people who are long haulers about Survivorcorps, because there's just good information there. Okay, the next item on our agenda is protocols. Now, a massage therapist wrote to the CDC about protocols for massage therapists, and she received a response in July, and she posted it online and recently started letting people know about it. So you can go follow this link to take a look at that information. It's really worth a read, because it puts all the CDC recommendations in one place. Again, I recommend the ABMP information as well, but this is information that comes from basically pointing massage therapists to standard protocols that healthcare practitioners should follow. And finally, a CDC study points out that COVID-19 patients were twice as likely to have gone out to eat or drink at restaurants and bars than those with a negative test result, making eating and drinking out a risk factor for infection. So it should be noted that the questionnaire did not differentiate between dining in or outside, but this means we don't know whether one is safer than the other, but combined, twice as many COVID patients as not did dine out somewhere. Okay, so it should be noted that we don't know where these patients got infected, but the twice as many did dine out, which could mean that dining out is a higher risk behavior. So the implications for us is that a potential question for us to ask is, have you dined out at a restaurant or bar in the last 2 weeks? It won't tell you whether the person is likely to have COVID or not. What it does tell you is that the person is willing to do higher risk behaviors, which in and of itself is a red flag when screening clients. So that's just something to pay attention to and to make some decisions about whether or not you want to screen out people who have dined out. That ends the news brief portion of our evening. So what I'm going to do next is turn off the recording so that way folks can share. And just so that you know, the people who are watching this recording, I ended up having to record this separately from the meeting because I forgot to turn the recording on when I did it. And so a couple of things came up during discussion, which I'll bring up at the next meeting, and after I've had a chance to do some more research on it. So we'll just go ahead and turn off the recording now, and thank you for watching.